My world was circumscribed by the scent of clean straw, the warmth of breathing dogs, and the low, rumbling snores of the wolfhounds in their slumber. The stones of the kennel walls were my confidants. They held the chill of the long northern winters and never offered an opinion. It was a small life, a quiet one, and it was mine. I was Elara, the kennel girl, and I sought nothing more than the gentle rhythm of my days, the morning feed, the midday run in the lower pasture, the evening grooming, and the soft humming that settled the restless pups to sleep. The great fortress of Vorhold was a creature of its own, a vast, stony beast that sprawled across the mountain pass, and I was but a single, insignificant cell within it. I lived in its belly, and most days it did not even know I was there. That was the way I preferred it. To be unseen was to be safe. The silence of my life was a luxury. A soft blanket I wrapped around myself against the drafts of courtly intrigue that whistled through the higher corridors. I heard the gossip from the kitchen staff when I went for my rations. Tales of alliances and slights, of silks and steel. It was all a story happening in another world. My world was one of blunt, simple truths. A sick hound needed a poultice of willow bark. A new litter needed warmth, and a loyal heart deserved a gentle hand. The Lord of Vorhold, the Alpha King of the North, was a truth of a different sort. Lord Vorlag. A man spoken of in the same tones one might use for a coming blizzard or a mountain's peak, with respect, with fear, but with no expectation of warmth. They called him the Stone Wolf, a man whose heart was said to be encased in the same permafrost that gripped his lands. I had seen him, of course, from a distance, a figure of granite and shadow, moving with a stillness that was more intimidating than any overt display of power. His face was a closed ledger, his eyes the color of a winter sky just before it breaks into a storm. Then came the day the world outside my kennels decided to intrude. A decree, read by a herald whose voice was too thin for the vastness of the main courtyard, echoed off the impassive stone. All staff were required to attend. I stood at the back, smelling of cedar shavings and dog, feeling as out of place as a field mouse at a parliament of eagles. The decree was full of the usual flourishes and pronouncements, words like prosperity and stability that meant very little to a girl whose primary concern was a new strain of kennel cough. And then came the core of it. Lord Vorlag was to take a bride. Lady Seraphina of the Southern Vale, a woman whose name was synonymous with political cunning and whose beauty was said to be as sharp and cold as a shard of glass. An alliance to secure the southern border, a sensible political match. The herald puffed out his chest, his voice reaching for a grandeur it could not quite grasp. "This union," he proclaimed, "shall finally bring warmth to the heart of the North." And that was it. That was the line that broke me. A small, undignified sound escaped my throat. A snort, really, half-strangled and wholly involuntary. The thought of anything, even a southern lady famed for her fire, warming the heart of the stone wolf, was so profoundly, comically absurd that my discipline, my carefully constructed invisibility, fractured for a single, fatal second. It was a tiny noise, swallowed almost instantly by the immensity of the courtyard and the shuffling feet of the assembled staff, but he heard it. Across the sea of faces, from his place on the high dais, Lord Vorlag's gaze lifted. It swept past rows of guards, merchants, and servants, past the herald and the sycophants, and it landed, with the unnerving precision of a striking hawk, directly on me. There was no anger in his eyes. There was no judgment. There was only a sudden, sharp, unnerving focus. The world narrowed to the space between us. The courtyard, the decree, the hundreds of other people. They all fell away into a muted blur. For a long, silent beat of the heart, the Alpha King of the North, the stone wolf himself, simply looked at me. He saw me. And in that moment, I knew my quiet, circumscribed life was over. The fortress, for the first time, had noticed I was there. That night, the wind was a thief, stealing the warmth from the stones and rattling the latch on the kennel door. The hounds were restless, their low whines a fretful chorus against the growing dark. I was settling a new litter of pups, humming the same low, tuneless melody I always used, when a shadow fell across the doorway. It was too large for a man, too silent for a bear. I froze, my hand hovering over a squirming, milky-smelling pup. It stepped into the faint lantern light, and the breath caught in my lungs. It was a wolf. But it was like no wolf I had ever seen. It was colossal, its shoulders as high as my waist, its fur the color of silver forged in moonlight. Its eyes were not the yellow of a wild thing, but a startling, intelligent ice blue. The eyes from the dais. Panic should have seized me. I should have screamed or fumbled for the heavy iron poker by the small hearth. But the great beast did not snarl. It did not stalk. It moved with a quiet, deliberate grace. One of the pups had wriggled free from the nest of blankets, and the wolf lowered its massive head, nudging the small, warm body back towards its mother with a gentleness that was utterly at odds with its terrifying size. It then turned its gaze to me. It took a step closer, and another, until it stood just out of arm's reach. It opened its mouth, but no growl came. Instead, it carefully deposited something at my feet. A single perfect petal from a night-blooming moonpetal, a flower that grew only in the Lord's private, high-walled garden. It was impossibly white, glowing faintly in the dim light, and it smelled of cool night air and something wild and clean. Then, with the same unnerving silence, it turned and was gone, melting back into the shadows it had come from. The next morning, Lord Vorlag himself appeared at the kennels. It was an event so unprecedented that Marta, the head cook, later told me the entire kitchen staff had stopped kneading dough to stare out the window. He was flanked by his second-in-command, a man named KENNEL with amusement permanently etched in the corners of his eyes. The Lord did not look at me, not at first. He seemed intensely interested in the quality of the door hinges. He cleared his throat, a sound like stones grinding together. "There was a disturbance reported near the kennels last night," he said, his voice a low mechanical rumble. "No, my lord," I said, keeping my own voice steady. "The hounds were restless, but that was only the wind." I did not mention his other form. I did not know how I knew, but I knew with a certainty that settled deep in my bones. The wolf was him. He finally looked at me, and I saw a flicker of something in that frozen gaze. Not anger, but a profound, almost human embarrassment. His hand went to the pommel of his sword, a gesture I would come to learn meant he was struggling for words. "I see." He gestured vaguely towards the garden. "The gardeners are careless. Things are misplaced." He opened his hand, and lying on his leather glove was a single, perfect moonpetal, identical to the one I had tucked into the pocket of my tunic. "This was found near here. I thought it might have blown in." The excuse was so clumsy, so transparent that it was almost endearing. Behind him, Kyle was suddenly fascinated by the sky, his shoulders shaking with what I was certain was suppressed laughter. I looked from the flower in the Lord's hand to his severe, unreadable face. "The wind is a thief, my lord," I said softly. "It takes what it pleases." A flicker of understanding, or perhaps relief, crossed his features. He curled his fingers around the petal, gave a curt, jerky nod, and turned, striding away without another word, his back as straight and unyielding as a fortress wall. Kale followed, and just before he rounded the corner, he glanced back at me and gave me a slow, deliberate wink. 2 days later, I was summoned. Not to the dungeons, as I had half expected, but to the steward's office. I was being reassigned. My new duties, the steward read from a scroll with an air of profound disbelief, were to be the sole caretaker of the Lord's private library. The reason given was that the collection contained ancient, delicate texts that required a gentle and meticulous hand. I, the kennel girl who spent her days wrestling wolfhounds and scrubbing floors, was now a specialist in rare manuscripts. The pretext was so thin it was transparent. I was being brought into his territory. The library was a world away from the kennels. It was a space of profound silence, a silence that held its breath and listened. The air smelled of old parchment, beeswax, and the ever-present scent of wood smoke from the massive hearth that dominated one wall. My job was simple: to dust, to move through the towering shelves like a ghost, wiping away the slow accumulation of time from leather-bound spines. Lord Vorlag was there most evenings. He would sit at his vast oak desk, a mountain of ledgers and maps before him, and work until the candles burned low. He never spoke to me. He rarely even looked up. But I was aware of him, and he of me. We shared the silence, two solitary creatures in a cavern of forgotten words. It became a strange, unspoken routine. I would dust, and he would work. And sometimes, when I arrived in the mornings, I would find things. Small, strange gifts left on the corner of the desk I was meant to polish. A perfectly smooth gray river stone, a single, iridescent raven's feather, a shard of blue glass, worn soft by the sea. They were the gifts of a wolf, not a king, sincere, direct, and utterly baffling. I never acknowledged them, and neither did he. They were part of the silent conversation we were having, a language spoken in objects and shared space. During those long, quiet hours, I began to see the man behind the stone facade. I saw the way he rubbed the bridge of his nose when he was tired, the deep line of exhaustion etched between his brows. I saw the immense weight of the north that rested on his shoulders, a burden he bore with a stillness that I had once mistaken for coldness, but now recognized as immense control. He wasn't a man without feeling. He was a man who had locked his feelings away in a dungeon so deep he had perhaps forgotten where the key was. And in turn, he watched me. I would feel his gaze on me when he thought I wasn't looking. I think he was trying to understand why I wasn't afraid of him, why I didn't grovel or flatter or shrink away. He was a puzzle to me, and I, it seemed, was one to him. The thaw, when it began, was almost imperceptible, like the first crack in a frozen river. I had stayed late one night, reorganizing a section of crumbling histories. The fire had burned down to glowing embers, and the room was filled with a warm, sleepy darkness. He was not at his desk. He was standing before the hearth, staring into the dying light, his silhouette immense and lonely. I thought he was unaware of my presence, and I made to slip out silently. The books. His voice was rough, startling the quiet. Do they speak to you? I stopped, my hand on the heavy door. Sometimes, my lord, I answered truthfully. They speak of things that are forgotten. He turned his head slightly, his profile carved by the orange glow. This fortress, it holds its breath. The silence is a weight. Sometimes I think if one more person bows to me, the stones themselves will crack from the strain of it all. It was the most vulnerable thing I had ever heard a man in his position say. An admission of loneliness so profound it ached in the air between us. Perhaps, I said, my voice softer than I intended, it is not a bow the stones are waiting for, but a laugh. He was quiet for a long moment. He did not turn to face me, but I saw the corner of his mouth twitch, a fractional movement in that stoic face. Perhaps, he rumbled, the sound less like grinding stones and more like the low thrum of the earth. It was not a friendship, not yet. But it was the beginning of a recognition, the shared secret of our solitude, acknowledged in the heart of his silent library. The arrival of Lady Seraphina was like a blast of frozen air into the tentative warmth of our quiet world. She was everything the rumors claimed, tall, elegant, with hair the color of spun gold and eyes the color of ice. Her beauty was a weapon, sharp and polished, and she wielded it with the casual arrogance of one who has never been denied anything. She swept into Vorhold with a retinue of servants and a mountain of luggage, her presence immediately changing the very atmosphere of the fortress. The air grew colder, taut with expectation and the sharp, cloying scent of her southern perfumes. She took an instant, visceral dislike to me. I was nothing, a speck of dust in the grand tapestry of her ambitions, but she seemed to possess an unnerving instinct for anything that might disrupt her perfect plans. She saw the way Lord Vorlag's eyes would, for a fraction of a second, find me when I entered a room. She saw the way the silence between us in the library was not empty, but full, and she could not abide it. Her first strike was public, designed for maximum humiliation. A feast was held in her honor, a stiff, formal affair in the great hall. I had been tasked with delivering a message from the Meister to Lord Vorlag. I did as I was bid, approaching the high table with my eyes downcast, trying to remain as invisible as possible. I delivered the scroll and was turning to leave when her voice, clear and cutting as a sliver of glass, sliced through the hall's low murmur. "My lord," she said, a faint, cruel smile playing on her lips. "Must you allow the kennel help to wander so freely through the hall? The scent of dog clings to everything." A wave of snickers rippled through her attendants. The hall fell silent. Every eye was on me, the small brown bird caught in the glittering snare of the court. I felt the heat rise in my cheeks, a flush of shame and anger. I stood frozen, waiting for the blow to land, for Lord Vorlag to dismiss me with a curt nod, to put me back in my place, but the dismissal did not come. The silence stretched, becoming heavy, dangerous. Then Lord Vorlag spoke. His voice was not loud, but it possessed a quality of such absolute, chilling authority that it seemed to drop the temperature of the room by several degrees. "Her name is Elara." He did not look at Seraphina. His gaze was fixed on some point in the middle distance, but his words were aimed directly at her. "And she smells of loyalty and honest work, a scent this hall has been lacking of late." The silence that followed was of a different kind. It was stunned. It was absolute. He had not just defended me. He had publicly rebuked his intended bride. He had drawn a line in the stone floor of his hall, and he had placed me, the kennel girl, on his side of it. Lady Seraphina's face became a mask of cold fury, her knuckles white where she gripped her goblet. I dared a glance at Lord Vorlag. He was looking at me now, and in the depths of his winter sky eyes, I saw a silent, unequivocal promise. You are under my protection. I bowed my head, a gesture of gratitude, not subservience, and walked from the hall, his declaration echoing around me like a shield. Seraphina was too clever to challenge him directly again. Her next attack was subtle, insidious, and meant to be final. She used the weapons of the unseen, the quiet poison and the hidden blade. I returned to my small chamber, the one I had been given near the library, late one evening, my mind still replaying the scene in the great hall. I was tired, my thoughts a jumble of fear and a strange, burgeoning hope. The room was cold, colder than usual, and the air was still. As I turned down the rough linen sheets of my cot, my hand brushed against something smooth, cold, and dryly scaled. I snatched my hand back just as a low, menacing hiss filled the silence. Coiled in the center of my bed, its black and red diamond pattern stark against the pale sheets, was a snake. It was not large, but it was ugly, its head a vicious triangular wedge. I had seen illustrations of it in one of the Meister's books on southern fauna. A Tenebrian stone adder. Its venom was legendarily swift, a poison that burned through the veins like liquid fire. This was no accident. This was a message, an execution. My heart hammered against my ribs, a frantic drum in the quiet room. But the panic that rose in me was cold, not hot. It was the clear, sharp terror of the hunted, and it brought with it a strange, defiant clarity. I did not scream. Screaming was what she expected. Screaming would have brought guards who would have found a snake in a servant's bed and dismissed it as a tragic, if unusual, accident. No, this deserved a different response. Moving slowly, deliberately, I backed away and grabbed the large glass jar I used for collecting herbs. My hands were shaking, but my purpose was firm. In a single, swift movement, I lunged, clamping the jar over the coiling serpent. It struck the glass with a sickening thud. I slid a piece of slate under the mouth of the jar, trapping it. I did not run to KENNEL. I did not run to the guards. Holding the jar with its furious, contained prisoner, I walked. I walked through the silent corridors of the fortress, my footsteps echoing in the late-night stillness. I walked straight to the council chamber, where I knew Lord Vorlag was meeting with his war chiefs. I did not knock. I pushed the heavy oak doors open and stepped inside. The dozen men seated around the great table stared at me in stunned silence. Lord Vorlag was at the head of the table, a map spread before him. He looked up, and the moment he saw my face, the jar in my hands, the entire atmosphere of the room shifted. The air grew heavy, charged with a sudden primal menace. All pretense of the stoic lord vanished, replaced by the pure, undiluted fury of the alpha. The wolf was looking out of his eyes, a predator that had just scented a threat to its own. I walked to the table and placed the jar in the center, directly on the map of the southern border. The snake hissed and coiled within its glass prison. "My lord," I said, my voice shaking only slightly. "A guest from the south seems to have lost its way. It found its way into my bed." The rage that flashed in Vorlag's eyes was not human. It was elemental. The temperature in the room plummeted, and the lords at the table physically recoiled, their faces pale. He knew. He knew in an instant who was responsible. He rose from his chair, his movements terrifyingly slow and controlled, a storm gathering its strength. He looked at the snake, then at me, and the raw, unmasked possession in his gaze was a thing of terrifying beauty. He had been challenged, his protection had been scorned, and the stone wolf was about to answer. He convened the tribunal the next day. The great hall was packed, a gallery of pale, nervous faces. A summons had been issued that no one dared refuse. I stood in the center of the hall, feeling small and terribly exposed. Lady Seraphina was seated near the dais, looking regal and untouchable, a faint smirk of condescending pity on her face. She believed herself utterly immune. Lord Vorlag sat on his high throne, his face a mask of granite. So still he might have been a statue carved from the mountain itself. But I could feel the power coiled within him, a living thing, waiting. He began without preamble, his voice ringing with cold authority. An attempt was made on the life of a member of my household, a creature of the southern provinces. A Tenebrian stone adder was found in Elara's chambers. He let the statement hang in the air, allowing the implication to settle. He then turned his gaze to Seraphina. Lady Seraphina, you are a famed expert on the fauna of your homeland. Perhaps you can enlighten us. She gave a delicate, dismissive laugh, the sound like ice cracking. My lord, you cannot be serious. You would heed the word of a dog keeper over a high-born lady? This is madness. Her arrogance was her weakness, a fatal flaw in her polished armor. She believed her status was an impenetrable shield. She is an insignificant creature, desperate for attention. She probably brought the vermin in herself, hoping to win your favor through some pathetic display of vulnerability. She rose to her feet, her voice dripping with scorn as she addressed the court. This is what happens when you elevate common dirt. It forgets its place. Then she made her mistake. Confident, untouchable, she sealed her own fate. Besides, she added with a wave of her hand, only a fool would fail to recognize a Tenebrian stone adder, a snake not seen this far north in a century, a snake known to be favored by my house for pest control. The words echoed in the sudden, profound silence of the hall. An admission. So clear, so absolute, spoken in her own proud, foolish voice. Kael, standing near the throne, actually closed his eyes for a moment, as if in prayer for the soul of one so monumentally stupid. Seraphina realized what she had said a second too late. The color drained from her face, replaced by a blotchy, panicked red. Lord Vorlag's gaze was flat and merciless. You are right, my lady, he said, his voice dangerously soft. I have been a fool. He let the words twist in her gut, letting her think for one horrifying second that he was agreeing with her. Then he turned his eyes from her, dismissing her as if she were no more than a speck of dust, and looked directly at me. I have been blind, he said, and the words were not for the court, but for me. An apology, a confession. He stood. Lady Seraphina, he announced, his voice now booming with the full force of his authority. The betrothal is ended. Your alliance is rejected. You will be escorted to the border by dawn. Do not return to my lands. He did not wait for her reply. He did not grant her the dignity of a final protest. He simply erased her from his world. Then he did something that shattered 1,000 years of tradition in Vorhold. Lord Vorlag, the Alpha King, the stone wolf of the north, descended the steps of the dais. He walked across the stone floor, his every step echoing the stunned silence of his court. He walked past his war chiefs, past the lords and ladies, past the memory of the woman who would have been his queen. He walked directly to me, standing small and alone in the heart of his power, and in front of everyone, he knelt. He sank to one knee on the cold stone, a king bowing to a kennel girl. He took my hand, his calloused fingers wrapping around mine. The touch was warm, a startling, living heat against my skin. "Forgive me," he said, his voice a low rumble meant for my ears alone. But his action, his impossible revolutionary gesture, was for all of them to see. He was not just choosing me, he was declaring me. He was vindicating me. And in that moment, kneeling before me, the stone wolf was stone no longer. In the weeks that followed, the fortress breathed again. The tense, chilled air that had arrived with Serafina dissipated, replaced by a cautious, wondering warmth. Her departure was swift and absolute, leaving behind nothing but a lingering, cloying scent of perfume in her chambers, which was promptly and thoroughly aired out. KENNEL, Lord Vorlag's second, handled the political fallout with an air of insufferable satisfaction, sending missives to the Southern Vale that were, I was told, masterpieces of diplomatic insult. The North needed no such alliance. The North was strong enough on its own. My life was transformed. I was no longer the kennel girl, nor was I the quiet librarian. I was simply Elara. My station was undefined, a source of endless whispered speculation in the halls. But my place was certain. It was beside him. We spent our evenings in the library, but the silence was different now. It was not a shared solitude, but a shared peace. The vast room, once a cavern of loneliness, had become a sanctuary. A home. Tonight, a fire roared in the great hearth, chasing the lingering chill from the stones and casting a warm, flickering light over the towering shelves. The wind howled outside, a familiar winter song. But here, inside, there was only warmth and quiet. I was curled in a large, worn armchair near the flames, a book of old northern legends resting open in my lap. Vorlag was not in his customary chair, nor at his great desk. He was on the floor, sitting with his back against the legs of my chair, his head resting near my knee. His usual severe armor and tunic had been replaced by a simple linen shirt, and the firelight softened the hard lines of his face. At our feet, so large he looked like a silver carpet, the great wolf lay sleeping, his massive head on his paws, letting out the occasional soft, contented sigh. Vorlag had been quiet for a long time, watching the flames dance. I ran my fingers gently through his dark hair, the texture thick and surprisingly soft. He leaned into the touch, a low sound of contentment rumbling in his chest. "I was wrong," he murmured, his voice so low I could barely hear him over the crackle of the fire. "About the books." "Oh?" I prompted softly, my fingers stilling. "They don't just speak of things that are forgotten," he said, turning his head to look up at me. The winter in his eyes had melted, leaving behind a sky the color of a clear spring morning. "They speak of things that are found." A slow smile spread across my face. He reached into the neck of his tunic and pulled something out. It was a small, folded square of rough-spun linen, frayed at the edges and softened with age. He unfolded it carefully, as if it were a priceless treasure. It was a scrap of fabric from the drab, brown smock I had been wearing that first day in the courtyard. The day he had seen me, "My other half," he confessed, his thumb stroking the worn fabric, "is a thief. This was the first thing he ever stole for you." that very night. He was insistent. I looked at the scrap of cloth, this mundane, meaningless thing that had become the first token of a silent, instinctual courtship. The first gift from the wolf who knew his heart long before the man did. And the laughter I had so carelessly, so fatefully, let slip in the courtyard all those months ago finally came bubbling up again. But this time, I did not stifle it. I let it out, a sound of pure, unburdened joy that filled the warm, quiet library. Vorlag watched me, and for the first time, I saw him truly smile. It was not the twitch of a muscle, but a real, unguarded expression of happiness that transformed his entire face, chasing away the last of the shadows. He joined my laughter, his own a low, rumbling sound that made the sleeping wolf's ears twitch. Later, we stood at the tall, arched window of the library, looking out over the battlements. For the first time in a generation, the long winter had broken early. A warm Chinook wind was sweeping down from the mountains, and the thick blanket of snow was beginning to recede, revealing the dark, rich earth beneath. In the Lord's private garden, the one I had only ever glimpsed from a distance, patches of green were stubbornly pushing their way through the melt. And there, clustered near the base of the old stone wall, a patch of impossibly white flowers had already opened their faces to the watery sunlight. Moonpetals. The fortress, it seemed, was finally thawing. The heart of the north was warming, not by the fire of a southern alliance, but by a quiet, steady flame kindled in the most unlikely of places. He slipped his arm around my waist, pulling me close against his side. The stone walls around us felt less like a cage and more like an embrace. The fortress was no longer just listening. It was singing a new and hopeful song.